I never believed in the supernatural. I was the kind of person who scoffed at ghost stories, who rolled my eyes at tales of haunted houses and cursed objects. My friends used to tease me about it, saying I was too rational for my own good. But all of that changed the summer I moved into the old apartment on 14th Street. It was a last-minute decision. My previous lease had ended abruptly, and I was desperate for a place to stay. The apartment was small, a little rundown, but the rent was cheap and the location was perfect. The landlord, a wiry old man with a thick accent, handed me the keys with a warning. Don't cover the bathroom mirror. It's original to the building. Very old. Very important. I laughed it off, thinking it was just some quirky superstition. The first few weeks were uneventful. I settled into my new routine, unpacked my boxes, and started to make the place feel like home. The only thing that bothered me was the bathroom mirror. It was huge, taking up almost the entire wall above the sink, and the glass was warped and cloudy with age. Sometimes, when I caught my reflection out of the corner of my eye, it seemed off, like the person staring back at me wasn't quite me. One night, after a long day at work, I stumbled into the bathroom to brush my teeth. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside. As I leaned over the sink, I noticed something strange in the mirror. My reflection was moving just a fraction of a second behind me, like a poorly synced video. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and chalked it up to exhaustion, but it kept happening. Every night, the delay grew more pronounced. Sometimes, my reflection would smile when I wasn't, or tilt its head at an odd angle. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the unease grew, gnawing at the edges of my mind. One evening, I invited my friend Sarah over for dinner. She was always up for a good scare, so I told her about the mirror. She laughed, but agreed to check it out. We stood side by side in the bathroom, staring at our reflections. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, Sarah's reflection turned to look at me, even though she was still facing forward. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Sarah nodded, her face pale. "Let's get out of here." We spent the rest of the night in the living room, trying to convince ourselves it was just a trick of the light. But neither of us could shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, I called the landlord and demanded an explanation. He sighed, as if he'd been expecting the call. "That mirror has been there since the building was constructed," he said. "People say it's a window, not just a mirror. A window to somewhere else." I pressed him for more details, but he refused to say anything else. I considered covering the mirror, but his warning echoed in my mind. Instead, I started avoiding the bathroom as much as possible, using the gym showers and brushing my teeth in the kitchen sink. But the mirror wouldn't be ignored. At night, I heard whispers coming from the bathroom, soft and urgent. Sometimes, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the glass, shadows flitting across the surface. I started having nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of being trapped on the other side of the mirror, pounding on the glass as my reflection walked free in my place. One night, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. Heart pounding, I crept to the bathroom. The mirror was intact, but there was a long, jagged crack running down the center. My reflection was distorted, split in two by the crack. As I stared, the reflection on the left side of the crack smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across its face that I stumbled back, tripping over the bath mat. The reflection's smile widened, and it raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. I watched in horror as the hand began to push through, the surface of the mirror rippling like water. I ran, slamming the bathroom door behind me. I called Sarah, begging her to come over. She arrived within minutes, and together we tried to figure out what to do. We decided to leave the apartment, at least for the night. As we gathered my things, we heard a loud crash from the bathroom. The door was shaking, as if something was trying to force its way out. We ran, not stopping until we were several blocks away. I never went back to that apartment. I broke my lease, forfeited my deposit, and found a new place across town. The landlord never called, never asked about the damage. Sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in a window or a darkened screen, and for a split second, I see that same unnatural smile. I don't know what I saw in that mirror or what tried to come through. All I know is that I witnessed something impossible, something that defied explanation, that shattered my understanding of reality that I've tried to move on, to forget what happened. But the memory lingers, a constant reminder that there are things in this world we're not meant to see. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I wonder if my reflection is still out there, waiting for another chance to take my place. I grew up in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and the woods seem to go on forever. My friends and I spent our summers exploring the forests, fishing in the lakes, and riding our bikes down winding country roads. We thought we knew every inch of the land, every shortcut and hidden path. But there was one road we never talked about, one that didn't appear on any map and seemed to exist only in whispered rumors. They called it the Vanishing Road. The first time I heard about it, I was 12 years old. My older brother, Jake, came home late one night, pale and shaken. He wouldn't say what happened, just muttered something about the road that isn't there. My parents dismissed it as a prank, but I could tell he was genuinely scared. Over the years, I heard other stories, kids who got lost in the woods and stumbled onto a road that led nowhere, hunters who followed a trail and found themselves somewhere they couldn't explain. The details were always the same. The road appeared out of nowhere, twisted and turned in impossible ways, and then vanished, leaving them stranded and disoriented. I never believed the stories. I thought they were just local legends, the kind of tales people tell to scare each other around a campfire. But that changed the summer I turned 17. It was late July, and my friends and I were bored. We'd spent the day swimming at the lake, and were looking for something to do. That's when Mark suggested we go for a drive. He'd just gotten his license and was eager to show off his dad's old pickup truck. We piled in, me, Mark, his girlfriend Emily, and our friend Tyler, and set off down the back roads, windows down and music blaring. We drove for hours, taking turns at random, exploring roads we'd never been down before. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. We were miles from town when Mark spotted a narrow dirt road branching off from the main highway. It was overgrown, barely visible, but something about it caught his eye. "Let's see where that goes," he said, grinning. We turned onto the road, the truck bouncing over ruts and potholes. The trees closed in around us, blocking out the last light of day. The air grew thick and heavy, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath the tires at first. It was just another country road, narrow, winding, lined with tall pines and tangled underbrush. But as we drove, things started to feel off. The road seemed to twist in impossible ways, doubling back on itself, looping around in circles. The trees grew denser, their branches arching overhead to form a tunnel of darkness. The headlights barely pierced the gloom. "Are we lost?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Mark shook his head, but I could see the worry in his eyes. "It's just a back road. We'll hit the main highway soon." But we didn't. The road kept going, twisting and turning, with no sign of an exit. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring the trees and the road ahead. The radio crackled with static, then went silent. Tyler checked his phone. "No signal," he muttered as we drove in silence, the tension mounting with every passing minute. The road narrowed, the trees pressing in closer. I glanced out the window and saw shapes moving in the fog, shadows that seemed to flicker and dance just beyond the reach of the headlights. Suddenly, the truck lurched to a stop. Mark cursed, and tried to restart the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. We were stranded, miles from anywhere, with no way to call for help. We sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the soft whisper of the wind. Then, from somewhere up ahead, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel. "Who's there?" Mark called, his voice shaking. No answer. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I peered into the fog, my heart pounding. A figure emerged, a man, tall and thin, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His face was pale, his eyes dark and hollow. He stopped a few feet from the truck and stared at us. For a moment, no one moved. Then he smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that sent chills down my spine. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and raspy. "We're lost," Mark stammered. "Can you help us?" The man shook his head. "No one leaves the vanishing road." With that, he turned and walked back into the fog, disappearing from sight. The footsteps faded, replaced by an eerie silence that we sat there, too scared to move. Then, without warning, the engine roared to life. Mark floored the gas, and the truck shot forward, the headlights cutting through the fog. The road twisted and turned, the trees blurring past. I glanced at the speedometer. Mark was driving faster than I'd ever seen him, but the road kept stretching ahead, endless and unchanging. Panic set in. We screamed at Mark to stop, to turn around, but he kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The fog grew thicker, the darkness deeper. I felt a crushing sense of hopelessness, as if we'd never escape. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the fog lifted. The trees thinned, and we burst out onto the main highway, the bright lights of a gas station shining in the distance. Mark slammed on the brakes, and we sat there, gasping for breath, our hearts racing that we stumbled out of the truck, shaken and disoriented. The gas station attendant stared at us in confusion. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. Mark pointed back down the road. "That dirt road, just past the bend." The attendant frowned. "There's no road there. Hasn't been for years. Washed out in a storm back in '92. We looked back, but the road was gone, just a stretch of overgrown weeds and tangled brush that we never spoke of that night again. We went our separate ways, each of us haunted by what we'd seen. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the vanishing road, the twisting path, the fog, the man with the hollow eyes. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, certain that if I ever find myself on that road again, I'll never make it out. I still drive those back roads sometimes, searching for answers. But the vanishing road is gone, erased from the map, lost to time. All that remains are the memories, the impossible, terrifying memories of a night when reality twisted and the world became something unrecognizable. When I was a child, my grandmother's house was a place of endless fascination and subtle dread. It was a sprawling Victorian on the edge of a small New England town, filled with creaking floorboards, secret alcoves, and the scent of lavender and old paper. My grandmother, a stern but loving woman, had lived there her entire life, and the house was a museum of her memories, family portraits, antique furniture, and shelves upon shelves of dusty books. But there was one thing in that house that always unsettled me. A faded black and white photograph that hung in the upstairs hallway. It showed a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in a sunlit garden. She wore a white dress and a solemn expression, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. There was something about her eyes, large, dark, and impossibly sad, that made me uneasy. My grandmother never spoke of her, and when I asked, she would change the subject or tell me not to worry about old ghosts. One rainy afternoon, when I was 10, I found myself alone in the house. My grandmother had gone to the store, and I was left to my own devices. I wandered the halls, exploring rooms I rarely entered. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of the photograph. The girl's eyes seemed to follow me, her expression unreadable. On a whim, I reached out and touched the frame. The glass was cold beneath my fingers. Suddenly, I felt a jolt, a sharp, electric shock that made me stumble back. The hallway seemed to darken, the air growing thick and heavy. I heard a faint whisper, so soft I could barely make out the words, "Help me." I spun around, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the storm and my overactive mind. But the feeling lingered, a sense of being watched, of something unseen lurking just out of sight. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the garden from the photograph, the sun shining down on a sea of wildflowers. The little girl was there, her white dress billowing in the breeze. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered, "find me." I woke with a start. The image of her face burned into my mind. I tried to shake it off, but the dream haunted me for days. Every time I passed the photograph, I felt a chill run down my spine. A week later, my grandmother fell ill. She was bedridden, and I spent my afternoons sitting by her side, reading to her or listening to her stories. One evening, as the sun set and the shadows lengthened, I gathered the courage to ask her about the girl in the photograph. She was silent for a long time, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Lillian. She was my sister. I stared at her, shocked. I had never heard of Lillian before. She died when she was 8. My grandmother continued. It was a long time ago. She disappeared one summer day. We searched for weeks, but we never found her. My parents were devastated. They hung that photograph as a reminder, a way to keep her memory alive. I wanted to ask more, but my grandmother closed her eyes, lost in her memories. I sat with her until she fell asleep, my mind racing with questions. That night, I had the dream again. The garden, the girl, the plea for help. But this time, there was something different. I saw a flash of movement in the background, a shadowy figure lurking among the trees. The girl looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "He's coming," she whispered. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I spent the next day searching the house, looking for anything that might explain the dreams. In the attic, I found an old trunk filled with letters, diaries, and photographs. Most were mundane, family gatherings, holiday celebrations, but one letter caught my eye. It was addressed to my great-grandmother, dated the summer Lillian disappeared. The handwriting was shaky, the words hurried. "I saw him again last night," it read. "The man in the garden. Lillian says he talks to her, but I don't trust him. There's something wrong about him. I'm scared." The letter ended abruptly, the last line smudged and unreadable. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was the man in the garden? And what had happened to Lillian? That night, I returned to the hallway and stood before the photograph. I stared into the girl's eyes, willing her to speak to me. The house was silent, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. Suddenly, the air grew cold. I felt a presence behind me, a weight pressing down on my shoulders. I turned, but the hallway was empty. When I looked back at the photograph, I gasped. The girl's expression had changed. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. That I stumbled back, my heart racing. I knew I had to get out of the house, but something held me in place. I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. A shadow appeared at the end of the hallway, a tall, thin man with hollow eyes. He moved toward me, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The man reached out, his hand cold and clammy on my arm. "Give her back," he whispered. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But when I opened them, I was alone. The hallway was empty, The photograph unchanged, I ran downstairs, desperate for answers. My grandmother was awake, her eyes filled with fear. "He's still here, isn't he?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You have to help her. You have to set her free." I didn't know how, but I was determined to try. I spent the next day researching the house, the garden, and the history of the land. I found an old map in the town archives, showing the original layout of the property. There was a small, overgrown section of the garden that matched the one in the photograph. That evening, as the sun set, I made my way to the garden. The air was thick with the scent of wildflowers and earth. I searched the ground, looking for anything out of place. After an hour, I found it, a small, weathered stone, half buried beneath a tangle of roots. I dug with my hands, uncovering a tiny box wrapped in a faded handkerchief. Inside was a locket, tarnished with age. I opened it and found a lock of dark hair and a tiny photograph of Lillian. As I held it in my hands, I felt a surge of energy, a rush of warmth and light. The air shimmered, and for a moment, I saw her, the girl from the photograph, standing in the garden, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. The shadowy figure appeared behind her, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She turned to face him, her expression calm and resolute. The man faded away, his form dissolving into the evening mist. That I returned to the house, the locket clutched in my hand. My grandmother was waiting for me, tears streaming down her face. "She's free," I said. She nodded, her eyes shining with relief. The photograph in the hallway faded over the next few days, the image growing fainter until it disappeared entirely. The house felt lighter, the air clearer. My grandmother recovered. Her spirits lifted. That I never saw Lillian again, but I know she's at peace. Sometimes, when I walk through the garden, I feel a gentle breeze and catch the faint scent of wildflowers. I like to think it's her, watching over us, finally free from the shadows of the past. I grew up in a place where the sky was everything. My family's ranch sat on the edge of the Texas Panhandle, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by endless fields and a horizon so wide it made you feel small. At night, the stars were so bright and so many that it felt like you could reach up and touch them. My father used to say that the sky was our roof, and the stars were the lights that kept watch over us. I was 16 the night the stars fell. It was late August, the air thick with the promise of rain. My parents had gone into town for supplies, leaving me and my younger brother, Caleb, to watch the house. We spent the evening on the porch, listening to the cicadas and watching the sky. There was a meteor shower forecasted, and Caleb was determined to count every shooting star. We lay on our backs, staring up at the sky, the Milky Way a river of light above us. The first meteor streaked across the sky, then another and another. Caleb whooped with excitement, his face lit by the glow of the falling stars. "Make a wish," he shouted, squeezing his eyes shut. I laughed and did the same, though I couldn't think of anything to wish for. Life was simple, predictable. I never imagined that would change as the night wore on. The meteors grew brighter, more frequent. The sky was alive with movement, streaks of light crisscrossing the darkness. Then, without warning, the air grew cold. The cicadas fell silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. A brilliant flash lit up the sky, brighter than anything I'd ever seen. For a moment, it was as if the sun had risen in the middle of the night. I shielded my eyes, blinking away tears. When I looked again, I saw something impossible. A star. No, not a star. Something bigger, brighter, was falling straight toward us. It moved slowly, almost gracefully, trailing a tail of fire and light. It didn't burn out like the others. Instead, it grew larger, closer, until it filled the sky. Caleb grabbed my hand, his fingers trembling. "What is that?" I couldn't answer. The object slowed as it approached, hovering above the field behind our house. The light faded, revealing a shape, smooth, metallic, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was silent, motionless, suspended in the air. We watched in awe and terror as a beam of light shot down from the craft, illuminating the field. The grass shimmered, bending as if pressed by an invisible force. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished. The object rose, accelerating into the sky, and disappeared among the stars. For a long moment, we sat in stunned silence. Then Caleb turned to me, his eyes wide. "Did you see that?" I nodded, unable to speak. That we ran to the field, our hearts pounding. The grass was flattened in a perfect circle, the earth warm beneath our feet. There was no sign of fire, no debris, just a lingering sense of electricity in the air. When our parents returned, we tried to tell them what had happened. They laughed it off, said we'd been watching too many science fiction movies. But we knew what we'd seen. The next day, strange things began to happen. The cattle refused to go near the field, circling wide around the flattened grass. The dogs barked at nothing, their hackles raised. At night, we heard strange noises, low hums, distant echoes, as if something was moving just beyond the edge of our world. Caleb became obsessed, spending hours in the field, searching for clues. He found odd markings in the dirt, geometric patterns, too precise to be natural. He started keeping a journal, recording every detail, every sound, every feeling. That I tried to move on, to forget what we'd seen. But the memory haunted me, a constant reminder that the world was bigger and stranger than I'd ever imagined. A week later, the lights returned. It was just after midnight when I woke to a blinding glow outside my window. I rushed to the porch, Caleb close behind. The object hovered above the field, silent and immense. This time, the beam of light swept across the house, bathing us in its glow. That I felt a strange sensation, a weightlessness, as if I were floating. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I saw images, flashes of distant worlds, alien landscapes, beings of light and shadow. I heard voices, not in my ears, but in my mind. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. We are watching. We are waiting. The light faded, and the object vanished. Caleb and I stood in the darkness, shaken and changed. After that night, nothing was the same. Caleb grew quiet, withdrawn. He stopped talking about the lights, stopped searching the field. I caught him staring at the sky, his eyes filled with longing and fear. That I tried to reach him, but he pushed me away. He spent more and more time alone, wandering the fields at night. Our parents grew worried, but they didn't understand. They couldn't point. One night, Caleb disappeared. We searched for days, combing the fields, the woods, every inch of the land. There was no trace of him, no sign of struggle. The only clue was his journal, left open on his bed. The last entry read, "They're coming for me. I have to go." I never saw him again. Years passed, but I never stopped searching. I traveled the country, chasing stories of strange lights, unexplained disappearances, impossible encounters. I met others, people who had seen the impossible, who had been touched by something beyond understanding. Some called it madness, others a gift. But I knew the truth. I had witnessed the impossible, and it had changed me forever. Sometimes, on clear nights, I sit on the porch and watch the stars. I look for the lights, for any sign that Caleb is out there, somewhere among the endless sky. I like to think he found what he was looking for, that he's not alone. And when the stars fall, I make a wish, not for myself, but for him. That wherever he is, he's at peace. That he knows I'm still watching, still waiting, still hoping for one more impossible night. I was never one to believe in the supernatural, but I always respected the stories. My mother used to say that every town has its ghosts, and every family has its secrets. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside of Philadelphia, a place where the most exciting thing that ever happened was the annual 4th of July parade. But when I was 23, I witnessed something that defied every explanation I could muster, a night that left me questioning the very fabric of reality that IT started with a simple favor. My friend Alex had just moved into a new house on the edge of town, a place he'd found for a steal. He was excited, but also a little nervous. The house was old, and he'd heard rumors about it being strange. He asked me to help him move in, and I agreed, eager to see the place for myself. The house was a 2-story colonial, set back from the road and surrounded by overgrown hedges. It looked normal enough, if a little neglected. The paint was peeling, the shutters hung crooked, and the yard was a tangle of weeds. But there was something about it, a heaviness in the air, a sense of being watched. We spent the day hauling boxes and furniture, sweating in the summer heat. By evening, we were exhausted. Alex ordered pizza, and we sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees. The neighborhood was quiet, almost eerily so. No cars, no people, just the distant hum of cicadas. As darkness fell, Alex suggested we take a break and explore the house. We wandered from room to room, laughing at the outdated wallpaper and creaky floorboards. The upstairs was musty, filled with the scent of old wood and dust. There were 3 bedrooms, each with a window overlooking the yard. In the smallest room, we found a door that didn't match the others. It was newer, painted a stark white, with a modern handle. Alex frowned, saying he hadn't noticed it before. We tried the handle, but it was locked. Probably just a closet, I said, but something about it unsettled me. We went back downstairs, but the mood had shifted. The house felt colder, the shadows deeper. Alex shrugged it off, blaming the long day and the unfamiliar surroundings. We decided to call it a night. I slept on the couch, drifting in and out of uneasy dreams. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought it was Alex, but the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. They moved from room to room, pausing outside the locked door. I sat up, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped, and the house fell silent. I waited, listening, but heard nothing more. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, Alex was pale and jumpy. He said he'd heard the footsteps too, and that he'd had a strange dream, a dream of standing in the hallway, staring at the locked door as something scratched at the other side. We tried to laugh it off, but the unease lingered. We spent the day unpacking, trying to fill the house with life and noise. But every so often, I'd catch Alex staring at the door, his brow furrowed in worry. That evening, we decided to try and open it. We searched the house for a key, but found nothing. Finally, Alex grabbed a screwdriver and began to work on the lock. It took longer than we expected, but eventually, the door swung open with a groan. Inside was a narrow staircase, leading down into darkness. We hesitated, but curiosity got the better of us. We found a flashlight and descended the stairs, the beam cutting through the thick, musty air. The steps creaked beneath our feet, and the walls closed in around us. At the bottom, we found a small, windowless room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with old jars and boxes. In the center of the room was a table covered in dust. On the table sat a single object, a faded photograph in a cracked frame. The photograph showed a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children, standing in front of the house. But the house in the photograph was different. It was pristine, freshly painted, the yard neatly trimmed. The family looked happy, but their eyes were strange, dark, almost hollow. As we stared at the photograph, the air grew colder. The flashlight flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. We fumbled for our phones, but neither would turn on. Panic set in. Suddenly, We heard footsteps above us, heavy, deliberate, moving from room to room. The same footsteps we'd heard the night before that we scrambled up the stairs, but when we reached the top, the door was gone. In its place was a blank wall, smooth and unbroken. We pounded on the wall, shouting for help, but there was no response. The house was silent, the air thick with fear. We wandered from room to room, but nothing was as we remembered. The furniture was gone, the wallpaper faded and peeling. The windows were boarded up, and the doors wouldn't open. It was as if the house had changed, become something else. Hours passed, maybe more, maybe less. Time seemed to lose all meaning. We tried to stay calm, to find a way out, but the house was a maze, shifting and changing around us. At some point, we found ourselves back in the small room, the photograph still on the table. But this time, the family in the photograph was different. The man and woman were older, the children grown. And standing beside them were two new figures. Me and Alex. We stared in horror, realizing that we had become part of the house's story. Desperation set in. We searched the room, the shelves, the walls, looking for any clue, any way out. Finally, Alex found a loose brick in the wall. Behind it was a small, metal box. Inside was a key that we raced back up the stairs, hoping against hope that the key would open a door, a window, anything. At the top, the door had reappeared. We unlocked it and burst into the hallway, gasping for air. The house was as we remembered, furniture, wallpaper, sunlight streaming through the windows. We ran outside, not stopping until we reached the road. When we looked back, the house was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. There was no sign of the house, no sign that it had ever existed. We stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, we walked back to town, silent and shaken. No one believed our story. The lot had been empty for years, they said. There was no record of a house, no record of anyone living there. But Alex and I know the truth. We saw the impossible, lived it. Sometimes I dream of that house, the locked door, the shifting rooms, the photograph on the table. I wake up with the taste of dust in my mouth and the sound of footsteps echoing in my mind. I don't know what happened that night, or what the house really was. All I know is that we witnessed something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every law of nature and reason. And sometimes, when I drive past that empty lot, I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a flash of white paint, a flicker of movement in the shadows. I keep driving, never looking back, because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. If you've made it this far, you've just traveled through 5 stories that, for those who lived them, changed everything they thought they knew about the world. Maybe you're sitting in the dark, headphones on, the shadows in your room suddenly feeling a little deeper, a little more alive. Or maybe you're listening in the daylight, telling yourself that these are just stories, that the impossible can't really happen. But the truth is, every person whose story you've just heard was once just like you, skeptical, rational, certain that the world made sense. Until, in a single moment, it didn't. What is it about the impossible that fascinates us? Is it the thrill of the unknown, the hope that there's more to life than what we see? Or is it the fear that, at any moment, the rules can change and we might find ourselves face to face with something we can't explain? Maybe it's both. Maybe that's why we tell these stories and why we listen to them. Because deep down, we all want to believe that the world is bigger, stranger, and more mysterious than we can ever truly understand. Think back to the man in the mirror who learned that sometimes the thing staring back at you isn't you at all. Or the friends who drove down a road that shouldn't exist and came back changed forever. The girl in the photograph whose silent plea for help reached across generations. The brother who watched the stars fall and lost someone to the sky. The house that wasn't there, and the people who became part of its story. Each of these tales is a reminder that the impossible isn't always out there, in some far-off place. Sometimes it's right here, waiting for us in the places we feel safest. Maybe you've had your own impossible moment, a time when reality bent, when you saw or felt something you couldn't explain. Maybe you've kept it to yourself, afraid of what people might think. But you're not alone. Every day, people all over the world witness things that defy explanation. They see shadows move where there should be none. They hear voices in empty rooms. They find doors that weren't there before, and sometimes they open them. If you take anything from these stories, let it be this. Keep your mind open. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the only thing standing between us and the impossible is our willingness to see it. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to look twice, to listen to the stories that don't make sense. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. And if you ever find yourself standing in front of a mirror that feels a little too deep, or driving down a road that seems to twist in ways it shouldn't, or staring at an old photograph that makes your skin crawl, remember these stories. Remember that you're not the first, and you won't be the last. The impossible is out there, waiting for someone to notice. Before we go, I want to thank you for spending your time with me tonight. Whether you're a longtime fan of the strange and unexplained, or you just stumbled onto this video by chance, I hope these stories have made you think, made you wonder, maybe even made you look over your shoulder once or twice. That's the magic of the impossible. It reminds us that we're alive, that there's still so much we don't know. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know in the comments. Share your own impossible experiences, or tell me which story hit you the hardest. If you have a tale you want to share, send it in. I'm always looking for new stories from people just like you. And if you want more, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and join me next time as we dive even deeper into the unknown. Until then, keep your eyes open. Pay attention to the things that don't quite add up. And remember, sometimes the impossible is just the beginning. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for believing, even if just for a moment, that the world is a little stranger than it seems. Stay curious, stay safe, and whatever you do, don't look away when the impossible comes knocking. Good night.